Hey guys, I almost started talking without the mic. So, hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Annie, a fine artist, designer, stay-at-home mom, wife, and so many other things. Today I have a little bonus episode. This is kind of like a part 2 video. If you saw the last video, I painted a lovely little painting inspired by these flowers here. And so I wanted to do a bonus video kind of going a little deeper into color mixing. So this is going to be a color mixing tutorial. I'm going to grab the paints that I used and a little more in depth on the colors that I used, because color tutorials are one of my most requested requests. Without rambling too much, grab a coffee. I have an afternoon coffee here, so we're good. And you can just watch, or you can grab your paints and let's get into the video. And as always, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment below and I will add that to my list of notes on videos to make in the future, going a little deeper to answer your questions. My dogs are barking. That's so annoying. Okay, let's get into video. So before we get into preparing our paper, I'm gonna quick go over the paints that we're using. We have titanium white, green gold, gold and fluid acrylics are my go-to right now. I have quinacridone, nickel azo gold, sap green, pyrrole orange, quinacridone magenta, and ultramarine blue. I purchased the larger 4-ounce bottles because I go through a lot of these paints, but you would be surprised how far these little bottles go. So you do not need to invest in these larger bottles because these little guys go much further than you would think. Another thing is this Liquitex matte medium. When you mix this in with your paints, they go even further. Now we're gonna get into preparing our paper. To start off our color study, I want you to grab a ruler, or you can freehand this too, that's totally fine. You don't have to use a ruler, but we're just going to make 1-inch squares on our entire paper. So make 1-inch marks on the bottom and then the side, and then do what you need to do to make your 1-inch squares. And then we'll get into the actual color mixing part of this tutorial. I'm so excited. If this is your first time doing a color study, I think you're gonna fall in love, because I know the first time that I did, I was obsessed. I think the cool thing about color studies is that there's no pressure to create some beautiful masterpiece. It's all fun, it's all play, and getting to know how to work with your colors better. The main goal of today's color study isn't to get crazy in depth with color theory. This is more just like creative play, and I wanted to show you a closer look and breakdown of how I used my colors and how I mixed my colors in the painting that I showed you. I'm going to move into finishing up making these little 1-inch squares here, and then we're going to move into labeling our paper so that we know where we're putting what. In the next step here, as we're finishing up our squares, we're going to label the top of our paper here. Each column is going to get one color, and then in those columns are where we're going to add which colors we use to mix that particular column. So we're going to use 2 columns for greens, and then 2 columns for red, 1 column for yellow, and then 2 columns for purple. And that is just for this particular color study. That's just what I did this time around. And yeah, also feel free to add notes on your paper at any point as you're working through the color study. Sometimes you tweak your mixes or make changes, or just if there's anything that you will need for future reference to remember, make sure you take note of that and add that to your paper. I do that all the time. We are basically just making room on our paper for all of the colors that I used in that painting, and everything that's used in that painting is gonna be referenced on this paper. The first color mix we're gonna make on our paper is green. We're gonna use pyrrole orange, sap green, and green gold, and that's gonna be our most saturated green and that we fill our very first square with. So as we work through our color chart here of the color study, the very first square at the top of each column is going to get the darkest, most saturated form of the color mix. And then as we work our way down, we're going to add a little bit of white to each square. And you're going to see as you work with the different colors, work with the different mixes, each pigment reacts differently to the light as you lighten the color. So that's a really fun part about color studies. As you do more and as you play and experiment, you'll see that sometimes you'll land on a fun little happy accident and land on a color mix that you weren't quite expecting, which is really fun. So now we're gonna go in and take a little bit of sap green, some green gold, and a tiny bit of pyrrole orange. And the pyrrole orange in this mix here is gonna be what actually tones down the green a little bit and warms it up. Because when you mix red, which red is in pyrrole orange, when you mix red with green, it darkens it and tones it down without muddying the mix up at all. I don't use black in my paintings because you'll find the more you work with black, it can tend to really muddy up your colors and tone down the vibrancy of it. So this green you'll see here is the green that I used in my tulip leaves. And a lot of that green actually got covered up in the painting, but this is a green that I use in almost all of my paintings. But in this specific piece that I am working off of today, this is the green of the tulip leaf. I am going to speed this little section up here so that you don't have to sit and watch me fill in each individual square. But at this point in our color study, I'm going to go add some titanium white into my color mix. And each time I add a little bit more white, I'm going to fill in the next square in my column. And I'm going to do that until I work my way the whole way down. One quick little thing to note here is something to keep in mind when you're mixing your original color mix is to make sure you mix enough so that you have enough to work in the whole column as you add white, because sometimes I don't add enough and then the paint colors aren't quite as consistent as they can be. But for the sake of consistency in your color study, make sure you add enough of that first initial color. Next, we're going to move into our next column, and this is going to be the green of the leaves that I painted in with the purple flower bunches. And that green is a little bit more of a cooler green. And for this color mix, I use a little bit of sap green and ultramarine blue. And just like the first green that I mixed up, I added a little bit of pyrrole orange to tone down the vibrancy of the green hue, because sometimes I don't use super vibrant colors, and sometimes the colors straight out of the tube do feel a little too vibrant. Here is a little close-up of a side-by-side of the two green mixes that we made. You can clearly see here one is much cooler and one is on the warmer side. And you know the drill, just like the first column that we worked through, we're going to add some titanium white with each square and work our way down. Next, we're going to move on to the reds that I used in my tulips. And for this color study, I'm going to do a cooler and a warmer red. But in this painting, I did tend to use more of warmer red tones. We're going to start by adding our magenta and go heavier on the magenta and a little bit of pyrrole orange, and then a little teeny tiny bit of green gold. And that is going to be our mix for our first square. So we're going to add that into the very first square, the top of our column. And then this is also sped up here, so I don't paint that fast. I wish I did, but I don't. So we're speeding this up here, and just like before, adding white in between each square and working our way down. So for the next column here, we're gonna do another red tone, but this one is going to be much warmer. This time around, we're gonna go a little heavier on the pyrrole orange and then add in the magenta. And to warm up our mix, we're gonna go a little, not heavy on the green gold, but we are gonna add a little bit more green gold than we did the first time around. And you can see on my palette there, this is a much warmer red. And we're gonna go in and add that to my first square. And just like before, we are going to speed this up again as I work my way down, just adding white in between each square and working our way down to the very, very lightest values. And something I did do in working down with this color, I added a little more green gold just so I could see. I was just wanting it to be a little bit more peachy toned. So that's something that I would take note of as I was working through this color study so that I have for future reference. So I can be like, at this square here, I added more green gold, and that's why there was such a shift in hue. Next, we're going to move on to the yellows that I used in my painting, which I used in the double daffodils and the little green leaves, little accent leaves. And to mix that, we are going to use pyrrole orange and green gold to get a really vibrant mustard yellow, which is one of my favorite colors. I love using mustard yellow in my paintings. I love using it as a feature color, as a focal point, but I also think it's a really fun accent color as well. I also use this yellow in my painting in the shadows of my daffodils. And then the whitest whites of the daffodil petals are the lightest value of this yellow here. Now we are moving on to the final two columns of our color study, and that is for the purples of these little flower bunches in our painting here. And that really sweet purple was inspired by these little purple flowers from my spring bouquet from the market. Aren't they so sweet? I thought they were just the sweetest little flowers. Our first purple column is going to be for a cooler tone purple, and we're going to use magenta with a little bit of ultramarine blue and go easy with the blue because that is a very highly pigmented color, and a little bit of blue goes a very, very long way. We're going to use that mixture and fill in our first column there, or our first square, and work our way down the column just like we did on the first 5 columns. And I sped this up here again for you so you don't have to sit and watch me paint through every single square. And this last and final column of our color study is going to be another purple. This is actually a much warmer purple, and we used magenta, ultramarine blue, and green gold. And the green gold in this mix warms down that purple, or warms up that purple, tones it down a little bit, which I tend to tone down a lot of my colors. I tend to work with warmer palettes, so I do use this purple a lot, and I really love green gold for toning down the color. And so going back to color theory, the purple and yellow are opposites on the color wheel. So when you use yellow, which is the yellow of the green gold is working with the purple to tone it down. So by using yellow to tone down the purple instead of black, it still holds that really pretty vibrancy. So it tones down the color without losing the vibrancy of it. So we are at the end. This is our maybe your very first color study, but you can see here side by side the two purple columns. One is clearly cooler and one is definitely warmer. And I tend to use the last color on the color study there. I use that one the most. I don't use that other one, the cooler purple, quite as much. But I love magenta because it's so vibrant and it gives you really vibrant color mixes. But anyway, I hope you had so much fun. So here's a little side by side of the painting versus the color study. So you can see how this color study today has really broken down each individual color that I use in the painting. And I hope that was really helpful and informative. And I know I'm a very visual person, so I hope this was a good visual for you as you work through color mixing. It was just a fun little beginner tutorial to kind of get your foot in the door and learn a little bit. So final thoughts. I hope you guys had so much fun. Again, if you were following along, I hope that was fun. If you were just watching to absorb the information so you can do it later, I hope it was very informative. We didn't get too deep into, I still have paint all over me. I need to wipe that off. We didn't get deep into color theory today at all. This was just kind of a basic breakdown of how I mixed my colors in my previous video. So this is just the part 2 bonus video to my first video and a breakdown of the colors that I use. You can do this with any colors. If you have colors that you've been wanting to play with, or if you have colors that you kind of have a harder time with, get out yourself a piece of paper, a paintbrush, get some paint on a palette, and then make these little squares, work your way down, and start with the most saturated, work your way down to light, and then play around with different color combinations and see how the colors act together. And yeah, I guess final thoughts on this video. I think I said everything. So on that note, bye.